If you get through it and it doesn't leave you seething with anger, then you just read it wrong. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And I'm quite excited because I noticed today that I have 68 subscribers now. So thank you so much if you check my videos out and if you've hit that subscribe button. I just would quite like to have at least one more, so then I'll have 69, dude! Apologies, I am an adult, but I was greatly influenced by Bill and Ted growing up and now can never see the number 69 without adding the word dude after it. So my last few videos have been shorter than my previous ones, and I don't know if that's contributed to my subscriber count going up quite a lot recently, and I know that I prefer making shorter videos, so I'm going to try and keep them under kind of 15 minutes from now on. That means that bigger videos like this, this will be a big video, I'm going to split them into two. So you are going to get a bonus video on Wednesday where I talk about the new releases that I read in June. But today I'm going to talk about the books that I read for reading challenges or just because in the month of June. So I had 12 books on my June TBR, which even at the time I knew was pretty ambitious. But actually I managed to read 10 of them and throw in an extra book as well. So I didn't do too badly. So I've got 7 books to talk about in today's video, 3 of which were 5 stars, 2 that were 4 stars, 1 3-star read and a 2-star read. So I'm going to start with the 2-star. I read this as a physical book, but I cannot for the life of me find it. So I've just clearly thrown it with gay abandon onto one of the many piles of junk in my house, and I cannot find where I've put it. But it was Scottish women's fiction, 1920s to 1960s, The Journey into Being, and it was edited by Carol Anderson and Aileen Christianson. And yes, I rated this one 2 stars. And I won't labour my chat about this one, it's really niche and I don't even know if it's still in print. It was an essay collection on female novelists who were active between the 1920s and the 1960s, and it's been on my shelf for years. It survived quite a few unhaulings and I've always kind of meant to read it because I am really interested in that subject, but it wasn't until this year where a challenge prompt kind of pushed me into picking it up that I finally did so. I've read some Jessie Kesson in the past couple of years. I've read Muriel Spark as well. They're both in this essay collection, but there are also some writers that I had literally never heard of. A lot of them have ended up on my Goodreads TBR. So for that, I'm really thankful that I read this book. But I have to be honest. So I'm not a student of literature, but I'm not completely stupid. And sometimes the essays in this book were so academic that I literally didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. I nearly gave up on it a few times because clearly someone like me is not the intended audience for this book, but there were some essays that were less dense than others and that kind of encouraged me to push through. I think it's great that they put this collection together to raise the profile of these female writers, many of whom have kind of been buried by their male counterparts, but it wasn't for a little old lay person like me. My 3-star read was Frankenstein, a love story by Jeanette Winterson, and I am so conflicted about this book. So on a scale of books that feature sex robots, this one is at least better than Margaret Atwood's The Heart Goes Last. But after reading 2 books featuring android hookers, I think I'm done. I just don't know why 2 authors that I really enjoy have both written books where they're so prominent. Like, just stop it. So this book has a dual timeline, and so we have the fictionalized account of Mary Shelley's creation of Frankenstein, and then we have a kind of near future timeline featuring trans man Dr. Rye and him working with Victor Stein, who is kind of a bit of a mad scientist, a geneticist, into AI, cryogenics, all that sort of stuff. I think it's great that this book has a prominent character who's a trans man, but I felt the reactions to him from other characters were offensive, and that might have been to show the flaws in those particular characters, but I also felt that the relationship that Dr. Rye has in this book is so problematic. It's painted as a heterosexual relationship, even though it's with another man, just because of Rye's genitalia, and that really made me question Winterson's grounding in trans issues. It stopped me from really enjoying the mad scientist modern day storyline. Well, that and the sex robots. What really made this book for me were the Mary Shelley parts. I thought that was really beautifully told. It was really compelling, and really I think that could have been an incredible historic fiction novel all by itself, but as a whole I don't think those parts were strong enough to carry the whole book. So on to my first 4-star read. This was The Broken Circle, a memoir of escaping Afghanistan by Enjeela Ahmadi-Miller. So after reading this book, I looked at some of the other reviews and realised I had totally missed that this is actually Enjeela Ahmadi-Miller's account, but as told to a ghostwriter, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, particularly in terms of how I separate the truth from the touch of an outside party. I think we all kind of accept ghostwriters when it comes to like celebrity memoirs, but I think with particularly like if it was fiction, a novel by a ghostwriter would just be such a conflict. But as this book is primarily about her story, I mean, I did really like this book, and I think for me it's the story rather than the writing that is the really important part. So I'm not mad that it was a ghostwriter who wrote it. So this is the real life account of Enjeela as a child escaping from Afghanistan with her siblings without her parents. It shows her childhood in pre-communist Afghanistan in quite an affluent family, to them having to flee the country after the Soviet invasion. I know from other books that I've read that Afghanistan, particularly Kabul at that time, was far different from the image that we have of it today, of being run by the Taliban, of having a strict religious regime where the freedoms of people have been stripped away, particularly those of women. Back in the 70s, it was quite a progressive city, and particularly through the eyes of Enjeela, who grew up quite privileged, it was a really special place to be. I also really enjoyed the children's experience of fleeing the country, although their background meant that, although as tough and horrible as the journey was, they were able to pay for the services of a guide, so the journey wasn't as traumatic as it could have been, and I'm glad for that, because I think without that help there wouldn't have been a story. The children wouldn't have made it. For me, the story dipped a little bit in the middle, but it really picked up again for me as they tried to get into India. There's some reflection in this book, particularly around Enjeela's feelings being conflicted about her home country, the bonds of family, and the injustices that they witness on their journey. I really enjoyed that, although now knowing about the ghostwriter, I'm wondering if those reflections could have been deeper had Enjeela had the ability or the license to put those feelings down herself, or whether they were even her reflections in the first place. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting book, quite an important read, but I'm a little bit conflicted about how I feel about that ghostwriter. My second 4-star read was Who Do You Protect, Who Do You Serve? Police, Violence and Resistance in the United States, and it was edited by Maya Shelley, Joe McCary and Alana Yulan Price. So in the wake of the very justified unrest in the United States and in other countries about the treatment of black people, or basically anyone who isn't white, I was really glad to see that the publishers Haymarket Books made this book free as an ebook, and I checked yesterday and it's still free, so I will leave the link in the description below so you can pick up a copy as well. I've always been proud that I am not a racist, but really interesting conversations and statements recently have made me realise that it's not enough just to have that moral belief that everyone deserves equality. Of course they do, but for my relative safety as a white woman, I can do so much more to fight for that belief alongside marginalised people or in spaces where they can't. For me, listening to the lived experience of others is really vital in building my knowledge and fueling my arguments. Hearing the voices of people who know firsthand that sort of oppression and violence and how that has shaped their lives is really vital. And this collection of pieces from different writers brings so many perspectives and lived experiences of policing in the US, and particularly police violence. It raises some really radical points, like doing away with policing completely, which at first I was a bit like, whoa, but the intelligence of the arguments made kind of brought me round to that way of thinking. I think the way that the system has failed so spectacularly for marginalised people, that they are advocating putting their safety and health at risk to avoid engaging with these services, is an absolute travesty. This book is a tough read. It pummels you with case after case, statistic after statistic about police violence. It's by no means a primer. It's a dense book to read through and might be quite intimidating to someone who's not used to non-fiction, but I think if you get through it and it doesn't leave you seething with anger, then you just read it wrong. Now on to my 5-star reads, the first of which is The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay. This is the story of Yale and Fiona, who are brought together through Yale's friendship with Fiona's brother Nico during the AIDS epidemic in Chicago. They experience a lot of loss and heartbreak as they see the people around them who they love being killed by the epidemic and the lack of healthcare available to them. We see how their relationship grows in all the devastation that's going on around them, and how Yale copes with discovering that his long-term partner is HIV positive. The book switches timelines from this period of their youth to a more modern day, where Fiona has found herself in Paris trying to track down her daughter. She's got quite a turbulent relationship with her daughter, and her daughter joined a cult and has now disappeared. So Fiona is trying to find her. And whilst in Paris, she stays with a friend from her youth and is kind of forced to reflect on how that time in her life shaped her as a woman and as a mother. I loved this book so much, and for me it was Yale's story that really made it. My heart was wrenched by the sense of loss and heartbreak and betrayal and the outcome of Yale's story. And I also really enjoyed the kind of sideline story of his career working in an art gallery in a university, and one of the art donations is this like mysterious collection of early works by famous painters. I wasn't so keen on Fiona's story. I think I would have preferred the book if it had focused only on the gay community in Chicago during the AIDS epidemic, but that's just a quibble. For me, this book is one of the best ones I've read this year and a solid 5 stars. My next 5-star read was Normal People by Sally Rooney. I was skeptical going into this book. It's had so much hype, and then of course there's the TV program as well that everyone seems to be loving, and I'm always a little bit wary of hype anyway. But then my best bookish friend, I thought he'd read this, but he'd actually read Conversations with Friends, which is Sally Rooney's other book, but he hated her writing style so much he DNF'd it, so I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this one because I usually trust his taste in books. But it turns out he's not always right, because I really loved this book. So this book follows the relationship of Marianne and Connell, who first meet at high school, and it follows them through the end of high school into their university years. And I'm not so old that I can't remember like the social hierarchy of high school and how teenagers kind of rank and treat each other. So I could definitely identify with both Marianne and Connell as they find their relationship constrained by the different social statuses they have in high school. As this book follows them into university though, their places on the social ladder flip, which I thought was really interesting to see, and I felt every misunderstanding or situation which either brought them together or held them apart. And like at times I would pity one and be really angry at the other, or it would flip, and I was just really rooting for them to get it right. In many ways this is actually quite a sad book in how things like class or the opinions of others dominates the happiness of these two young people. But it's also really frustrating because a lot of the barriers and problems are totally of their own making. Rooney really knows how to craft a character, and some of the descriptive pieces, including but not only the sex scenes, are just so painfully beautiful and heartbreaking. I did have a slight issue with the conflation of BDSM and self-harm, but I kind of understood how it could be part of a certain character's story. This book moved me, it enthralled me, and I took great pleasure in telling my mate that he was totally wrong about Sally Rooney. And now I just can't wait to see the TV adaptation. And my final 5-star read was John Boyne's The Heart's Invisible Furies. I put off reading this for quite a while because, you know, it's a chunker. And if you're putting off for the same reason, don't, because it flies by. I was so engrossed in the story that it felt effortless to read, but don't mistake that for me meaning it's like fluffy, because he tackles some really tough topics in this book. Homophobia, life as a gay man in Ireland where it was, I think, illegal to be homosexual, heartbreak, dysfunctional families, mistreatment of women under Catholicism, AIDS. I mean, I could go on and on and on. He knows how to create unforgettable characters, crafting humour and an epic saga into something that is upsetting but a page turner and actually quite comforting all at the same time. So this is the story of Cyril, told through his life in 7-year jumps, from when he is adopted as a newborn baby by a couple that keep him at arm's length, through his adolescence and young adulthood as a closeted gay man who is in love with his best friend, to him finding true love, and then to being an old man and reflecting on how all of these things shaped him and the relationships around him. But it's also the story of Ireland's attitude towards gay people, the AIDS epidemic, and so much more. The sheer scope of this book is so impressive, and Boyne brings together all the moving parts perfectly. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this isn't just one of my favourite books this year. I think this might be one of my favourite books of all time, so I will definitely be getting a version with a better cover. So those are my challenge and other reads that I got through in June. I'll wrap it up here, but to see what I thought of the new releases that I read in June, stay tuned for Wednesday's video. Once again, thank you very much for subscribing. If you're new, or even if you're not, leave me a comment. I would love to say hi. Let's chat books. And until next time, bye.